Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me for another iconic comic review. And the digital files are out for Kamen America 10, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let me get some of the housekeeping out of the way right off the bat. Since I don't have the physical product here in front of me, I can't say how good it is, but I'm just going to extrapolate based on the quality of your typical iconic comic book that it's going to be quite good. Their books are almost always hardbound with excellent production values on good paper stock. When they're not hardbound, they're either perfect bound or staple bound, again on a good quality paper stock, and the binding chosen is typically based on the length of the book. This is going to be a hardback, and I expect it to be just as good as all their previous hardbacks because they have quite a track record at this point. If that changes, I'll be sure to let you know. But after about 15, 20 books from Iconic, I don't really expect something to suddenly change about the production process, so I'm not really as married to that as a standard for judging them, at least at this time. Maybe they'll go through some kind of sudden implosion where they put out a bunch of bad books with bad printing or bad bindings, and if that happens, I'll begin waiting for the physical product again to give a review, but I don't see any reason to anticipate that. By the same token, the art style remains very, very consistent. While Timothy Lim has certainly improved, both I think in his compositions and his general rendering, I'd say, your typical character in Kamen America is a little bit more detailed and more in-depth than in previous versions, especially during the action scenes. I don't really know, as there's a whole lot more I can say about what he does. Tim has perfected his artistic style for this series, and it's a really good style. We are well past the point where he's struggling to really act out emotions on his characters' faces. You never doubt what mood characters are in on any given panel because Tim really sells them at this point. He has perfected what he needs to do in order to tell this story. And my comments on those 2 points kind of embody the problems I have talking about this volume, at least in the sense of giving it a review. It's not my intention with my reviews to ever give a complete point-by-point plot breakdown and explanation of all the good and bad points in a comic book. I don't really think that's beneficial for audiences or for the creators. My general goal is to give an overall sense of what people can expect to find in the pages of a book and how meaningful it is to an existing audience and to a new audience. But when I'm talking about a book that has almost 1,000 pages of continuity at this point, it's difficult to say much about the current installment without rehashing a bunch of old stuff or indulging too deeply in spoilers. At the same time, one of the really fun things about being a part of one of these ongoing franchises is getting to indulge in speculation a little bit about what's going to happen as the continuity builds, as characters are seen through new lenses, and as the world building deepens. Furthermore, as I look at a lot of these independent products that I like to look at, I try to give some basic storytelling advice because I know a lot of indie creators, they never get that kind of feedback. They don't have editors or highly nitpicky fans to do that for them, and it can really slow down or completely stop a creative team's ability to improve. But I don't think that Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini have that issue. I think they have really maintained a high level of quality through the entire production run they've done for Iconic Comics. So I think what I'm going to do in this video, and probably most of my Kamen America and Black Ops videos going forward, is I'm going to give a brief thumbnail of the plot, my recommendation on whether you should buy it as an ongoing reader or a first-time reader, and then indulge in a little bit of speculation after a spoiler warning to make it quite clear where the demarcation is. So first of all, what is this book about? Well, it's about a couple of different things. First, it tracks the ongoing machinations of Cynthia Prestige, who is expanding her influence through all sectors of American life, the media, economics, and a little bit of politics, although not as much of that as the other 2 areas. She's up to a lot of interesting things here, but for the most part, she's just trying to keep the Common Core out of her hair, an end goal she largely succeeds in over the course of this book. We see that Carly and company will lose access to a lot of their official government connections, And they're going to be tied up in their personal lives as well, at least for the duration of this book. The secondary plotline, or perhaps the primary plotline, revolves around Misha. And I think that's a pretty good choice because Misha is a fan favorite character and she hasn't gotten a really strong focus in the series for quite some time, which is understandable as there have been a ton of new characters introduced. But she has a lot of fans and it is nice to see her getting a little more love from the creative team. Regardless of which one of these two plots is A and B, they are tied together very well through the character of Misha and the antagonist, which in this book is Zener Ecto. And turns out Zener Ecto has a close personal connection to Misha, which is, the perfect way to create dramatic tension. There also continues to be a certain amount of dramatic tension within the team, as Sylvia and her stepmother Cynthia are at odds, but Sylvia is still trying to convince Carly that they can trust Cynthia. She's being manipulated somehow. A very understandable point of view for Sylvia, but not one that I really agree with. And Carly, of course, is still dealing with the emotional impact of her father's death at the end of Volume 8. All in all, these threads are served very well in this book. It's a lot to juggle, and Pellegrini does a really good job of giving each of these different storylines enough attention that we get satisfaction for each of them. And yet I also feel that the characters that are not front and center are really well served in this book, too. There's a lot of good character moments for Kimiko and even Carly's mom, a character that hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention so far. Since this is in the middle of a saga, we aren't really getting a strong ending to this book. It raises almost as many questions as it answers, which is fine. Again, this is a series with strong continuity, and we know that it comes in 4-book arcs. So having the second of 4 books be a little more open-ended when you hit the final page is fine, in my estimation. Overall, I think that Kamen America 10 provides a really good conflict with a fun haunted house scenario for the Kamen Corps to deal with. After some of the bigger and more bombastic conflicts at the Hoover Dam and then a Japanese theme park, it's nice to have a smaller, more intimate story with just our core cast of characters and a couple of guests. All that said, Kamen America is a series with really strong continuity, and I can't recommend this as a book to jump in on. Yeah, new readers, they could open this up and they have an okay time, but there's a lot of stuff in here they're just not going to get. And I think that's fine. It could still be a fun read if somebody at the dentist's office sees you reading it and says, "Hey, what are you looking at there?" Sure, share it with them. They'll probably enjoy what they see, but if you're getting something for someone to start off the story, I would recommend one of the earlier crossover events or just the beginning of the second saga. I still think that's one of the stronger books in the series for a new reader to jump in on. All of this assumes, of course, you don't just own one of the omnibuses to loan to people. Like a real fan. Speaking of real fans, if you're one of those, you'll definitely want to pick this up because it maintains the high quality of the series so far, and it tells a really fun story about a fan favorite character. Again, I think Misha stans are going to eat really well once they read this book. With all that said, let's do a little bit of speculation. So after this point, there are going to be spoilers. I thought the reveal that Zener Ecto was the perhaps reanimated corpse of Iori, Misha's old boyfriend from her mercenary days, was a really clever one. I certainly didn't see it coming. Whether it was planned ahead of time or it was just a riff on the existing themes that Pellegrini and Lim came up with as they were working on the story, it's a very inspired choice, and revealing it here in this very intimate setting is also wise. On a meta sense, I thought the setup of this particular scenario as a girls' night for the members of the Kamen Corps is particularly deft because it gives a good reason for Misha to be thinking about her lost boyfriend in the narrative. A diegetic reason for her to be reminiscing about this person we know she's loved and lost already. I thought the contrast between Iori as a very devout man and Misha as something of an agnostic, if not an outright atheist, was also very nice to see because most of the Kamen Corps so far has been presented as at least casually Christian. And while I have no problem with the Christian worldview being prominent in the story, I think it is interesting when you have different points of view in conflict, because it really does show a little bit more about what characters value as they examine these questions. Hopefully, we'll continue to see that thread develop a little bit. Not so much that it becomes grating to the general audiences, because I think you have to keep them in account, but that kind of casual clashing of worldviews is good, rich fodder for stories. And in particular, seeing the way Iori chooses to make a deal with whatever the ecto entity is giving him his powers is particularly thought-provoking, and hopefully will be explored as the story goes on. I do think it's kind of interesting that Zener Ecto and Zener Psycho are presented as these supernatural forces rather than the more commonplace mutations that the other three Zeners seem to be. It also raises the question, is Zener Psycho also someone connected somehow to the Kamen team? If so, who would he be? Would he be someone we've already encountered or someone we are going to encounter? If he's someone we've already encountered, I think the most logical conclusion is that he's somehow connected to Sylvia. Perhaps his dad's body has been inhabited by some demonic force Cynthia summoned while trying to prevent his death. I think that's a bit of a stretch. We did actually see him die, although I suppose his body could have been reanimated afterward. I don't know. Given the expansion of the Prestige Empire and the building of pyramids everywhere, there's certainly some kind of occultic or Gnostic symbolism being played on here. Very interested in how that will build in the future as well. As a side note, I do think it's very interesting the way that Pellegrini and Lim have managed to incorporate modern day talking points and theories without being quite as on the nose as some other people. In this particular volume, we see Cynthia talking to the Klaus Schwab stand-in. But rather than talking about the World Economic Forum, they just talk about the global agenda, which I think is going to do a little bit better than trying to, rejigger the WEF acronym into something else. And, a global agenda is just kind of a more generic, universal phrase than something that is rooted in a specific time period. I think it gives the story legs, makes it a little more timeless. Lastly, one thing that has become very clear to me after this volume is that we are entering into Kamen America's mother phase. And what I mean by that is the most important figure outside of the main cast is going to be their mothers now. In the first two arcs, it was their fathers, and now we are seeing the other side of their parentage. I think that's a good choice. It kind of balances things out, and it lets us see the entirety of the forces that have shaped and influenced our main characters. All in all, this is a very interesting evolution of the storyline, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. So thank you for joining me for my thoughts on Kamen America Volume 10. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support, check out my book, Have Spell Will Travel, which is available on Amazon using the link below. Let me know what you think of Kamen America 10 down in the comments, and while you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.